Yeah, brilliant. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Iva Horčicová, and on behalf of the E2W, I would like to welcome you to our second Sharing the Knowledge episode. Today's topic will be artificial intelligence in finance, and I'm really excited to have three amazing speakers with me. We have Ivana Bartoletti, Julia Valentine, and Stephen Hunter. But before I hand over actually to them to give us a short intro, I would like to just get away with a couple of housekeeping items. So the session will last around an hour, similar to our last session. And at the end of the panel discussion, we would like to give you as much space as possible for asking questions. So you can either send your question through the chat on the Zoom, or you just simply raise your hand and we'll give you a floor. So we want to make it as interactive as possible, so please don't hesitate and ask as many questions as you can. And then, yeah, if you could mute yourself while you are not speaking so that we can hear everybody loud and clear, that would be brilliant. Perfect. So without further ado, I think I will ask our speakers to introduce themselves. So Ivana, would you like to start?
Hi, thank you, and really good to be here with you. So my name is Ivana Bartoletti. I have been working in the field of privacy law for quite a long time now. My day job, I work for Deloitte as I'm a technical director there. And what I do is I support organizations working with artificial intelligence, machine learning and blockchain technology, and how to embed and build a privacy and digital ethics by design approach. I've co-edited the AI book on the use of AI in finance, and I've just published my first book on my own, which is An Artificial Revolution, which looks at the politics and geopolitics of data.
Thanks a lot, Ivana. Great to have you. And now over to Julia.
Hi, my name is Julia Valentine. I spent the last 23 years working in fintech. Started at JP Morgan in IT back in the day when algorithmic trading and program trading were new, over 20 years ago. And then worked for D. Shaw. It's a quantitative hedge fund that basically used a lot of the trading, kind of cutting edge technology in trading before all of the AI machine learning stuff. And then I went on to serve in the CEO, CTO capacity at large organizations. So I'm a practitioner. I'm here to learn from fellow panelists about all of the important concepts and theories, because I've had to map out the strategy and kind of hands-on try to figure out how to lead companies through this. And it's been a challenge.
Great. Thanks a lot, Julia. Again, great to have you. And last but not least, we have a man finally in the panel, Stephen.
Thanks for having me, Eva. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and to be asked to speak. My name's Stephen Hunter. I'm the founder of a fintech startup called 9fin. Previously worked in investment banking at JP Morgan, and then at a fund afterwards in debt capital markets, primarily focusing on the high yield bond and leveraged loan market. And our company is a pre-Series A startup with 15 people, and what we do is use artificial intelligence and machine learning to find key information in bond documentation and company reports, and then we make that available to funds and asset managers and banks via a web-based platform. So really excited to be here. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you all of you for joining us. I'm really excited about the debate which we will have today. But before we jump into it, I have actually one question for all of you in the audience, and that is, could you raise your hand if you are familiar what actually artificial intelligence is and what the concept is all about? I see some brave hands. Okay, cool. I mean, for those of you who are not too familiar with it, no worry. I'll ask Stephen actually to sort of summarize it for us. What should we imagine under the term artificial intelligence or machine learning?
Thanks. It's a pretty monster question. It's such a big area, and there's actually a little bit of dispute as well around exactly what comes within artificial intelligence and what doesn't. I think a lot of people, when they first hear the word, think of kind of the Terminator films and Skynet and a machine taking over the world, and some kind of super intelligent computer that's going to destroy humanity. We're not anywhere close to that yet, but the general idea of artificial intelligence is training machines or programs or algorithms to emulate the way that humans make decisions and human intelligence. And there's a whole load of different sub-segments within it. One in particular that we focus on a lot at 9fin is machine learning. So the idea that you can not only have a program or a machine making a decision autonomously, but you can actually teach it to improve itself and get better over time. And we use that for a number of different things, whether it's recognizing certain information in documents. But in terms of how quickly the area is advancing, I read a few interesting stats, which I thought would be cool to share. So some of the applications of AI are around reading text, natural language, how humans communicate, but also things like image recognition. So a cool one that's a kind of classic example of early stage AI and where we are versus humans and our ability to understand things is the ability to pick between a dog and a cat. The classic kind of idea, if you're given 12 images of cats and dogs, and then you have to choose which is a cat and which is a dog. And up until very recently, people in kind of 2007 assumed that this would be a very hard problem for machines to solve, and whereas for humans it's very simple. And so in 2007, humans 99.6% of the time solved that problem in under 30 seconds. I'm quite interested who the 0.4% were, but the ability to recognize a cat or a dog. And the paper that analyzed that thought that there was a 1 in 54,000 chance of a machine being able to solve that problem. The same year, some code was released which solved that problem to 82% accuracy, and then a couple of years later, machines are now about 80 or 98.9% accurate at being able to identify a cat or a dog. So we're not quite taking over the world. Humans are still better at recognizing cats and dogs, even with the most groundbreaking tech. But it can be applied to lots of different things.
Great, that's really useful. And actually, Julia was very kind to share with us one example of artificial intelligence. Julia, would you like to just introduce a little bit of what I will play in a second?
So this is just for fun. There was a competition to use AI, to use deep learning, to write a song that could be used in the next Eurovision competition.
So I will just, play sort of a minute of it. I will then share as well the link with you guys so that you can listen to all of it if you want. But bear with me when while I choose the right screen I want to share.
One, and this was just this May, just to let you know, just this May.
Right. I hope you can see it all. Right, I will stop it here, but I will share the link very shortly. But I think it was a good intro just to get a little bit of idea what actually artificial intelligence can do. And so now I think we can move to sort of how artificial intelligence can play the role in financial industry. And so given that we all work in financial industry, I think the first question for me would be, how will actually AI impact the various areas of finance? And I would like to start with Julia, because the banks, a big part of their business, as well for asset managers, hedge funds, is trading. So Julia, how do you think AI will impact trading, and how will trading look like in a couple of years' time?
So referring back to the song, the tech behind creating the song is the same tech that Spotify uses. Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong. It's also a lot of the same tech is used, obviously, by financial services companies. And when we talk about trading, I want to focus on three concepts. The first one is data, right? It's being able to identify key pieces of data that are required before you trade, right? It's the idea generation stage of trading. And then there's obviously execution. And so let's talk about these three concepts. There's data, there's prediction, and then there's pattern detection or recognition, right? So think of these three, because the reason that machine learning is so important in trading is because the cost of prediction is getting significantly cheaper with time, right? As machine learning technologies evolve, obviously it's much cheaper for us now to be able to look at the patterns and detect what is it that's in the best interest of that particular hedge fund or trading shop or whatever bank trying to execute. Let me give you an example. A lot of companies need to rebalance their portfolios, right? You've probably dealt with that. So at the end of the month, if you're a pension fund, if you're a big asset owner and you're trading, you need to rebalance your portfolio because you want to be allocated to certain sectors. Like you have policy rules, right? You're obligated to hold certain things and divest of them if you exceed your policy rules. So as you're rebalancing, you are acutely interested in the patterns. Is everybody rebalancing in the morning or during the day? Or do you know what I mean? Like what's going on in the market? So that kind of pattern detection and recognition is extremely easy for AI to do, for machine learning to do. And it's something that traders used to sit there and that intuitively know, right? It used to be all done by human beings, and probably not as efficiently as AI can do it now because AI is objective. And then obviously anytime you need to predict anything, right? If you're predicting the future, you're trying to see, well, here's what's going on in the market. That's another strength. And so I'm trying to give you kind of the fit between what AI does best, where the supply and demand is, because we're going to use more of it, the cheaper it becomes, and the more it's productionalized. And if we can buy it from smaller firms, right, from brokers that do algorithmic trading that offer these types of things, then companies will buy it increasingly more. If they can buy good data recognition from a company like Stevens, they'll do that, right? So that's where trading specifically has been going. And then we can obviously talk about other functions within asset management. Is that good? Was it? Well, if you have any.
Yeah, no, I'm sure we will come back to questions, but I think, the sort of split between the different stages of trading, how it impacts, I think it's very clear. Thanks so much. Now, moving to Stephen, and I mean, you and your company, you are trying to disrupt or improve the way how financial institutions, being banks or asset managers, how they analyze companies and how they read financial statements. So how do you see it going forward in terms of sort of credit and equity analysis? Do you think that sort of computers will do it for us at one day?
I think computers will do more of the boring things to let us do more of the interesting things. I think when you look at equities and credit, equities is much further ahead in terms of adoption and use of technology. Whereas the world that I live in of credit and fixed income is still quite old school. Some of the companies, when they provide their loan reporting, still fax the results to give you an idea of the technological adoption in part of my market. So we're a little bit behind, but I think there's a couple different ways that it will impact the way that that analysis is done. So, for example, one of the things we do at Ninefin is try to monitor a number of news sources that one individual human analyst couldn't possibly monitor at the same time. So by deep crawling the web, we can spot when companies announce certain things like a fire in a factory or maybe negative news sentiment, and we can filter through all of that noise. That's one of the really powerful ways that you can use tech to analyze things at scale that would be impossible for someone to do across, a million news items in real time. So, for example, we use machine learning day to day at Ninefin to try and spot news items amongst the noise for companies like Netflix. So, if you Google Netflix or you went on Google News for Netflix and tried to find something that was relevant to that company's performance in the equity market or the debt market, you get a lot of noise. So you'd get the top 10 things to watch on Netflix today. A new series has been launched on Netflix, someone complaining about Netflix. And so trying to sift through all that noise and work out actually what's relevant and is this relevant to bond price is actually a lot easier for a machine to do at scale if you give it enough data to train. So we can work out that Netflix being awarded a prize or a company being awarded a prize is not necessarily relevant for bond price, but then being awarded a brand new contract, very, very similar in language, actually is relevant. So that's some of the ways that you can use AI to analyze things at scale that would be impossible for one or two individual human analysts to do. But I think it really comes down to two things. One is time saving across kind of mundane tasks, pulling and extracting data at scale, but also the bit that was mentioned earlier around prediction and being able to use the data to recognize patterns and some of the inbuilt things that bankers, for example, know when they look at a company. They realize the bonds have been there for maybe 3 or 4 years. It's private equity owned. They probably want to refinance sometime soon. Those kind of intuitive decisions, you can also use AI to spot opportunities that might have otherwise slipped the net because you can't hold, the whole high yield bond market, for example, 100 deals in your head at the same time. So there's a load of ways it's going to impact the market. Almost every single part of capital markets is being impacted by it. But I think time saving is a really, really big one.
Okay, thanks a lot. I mean, it's reassuring a little bit for me, given that I'm credit analyst, that you will not take over the world. No. I see a couple of hands, actually. I see Molly and Fatima raising hands. Do you want to ask questions, or was it by mistake?
No, sorry, that was as to if we know about AI earlier on. So we did it a tech way rather than actually raising our hands.
Cool. Right, and so that was sort of, we now discussed more sort of the front office tasks. I have one question for Ivana, and it's more about the main back office. Do you think that AI will play a significant role in sort of risk management and fraud detection going forward?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting question, and definitely yes. So I think the most important thing to consider here is that the use of machine learning in this is absolutely useful. And for example, when it comes to meeting the regulatory obligations that financial institutions have, then that's where I think the organizations that can really harness the value of these technologies, they can do it better and faster and quicker. So if you think, for example, the machine learning can learn what is the sort of optimum behavior, what is the good behavior, what is the normal behavior of customers. And then, of course, they can spot at a very early stage whether there is something that is different from the usual behavior. Or they, for example, can go identify particular text or in email bodies where, for example, there is a particular combination of words that is a sign of something that could potentially be a little bit darker than what it is. So the role of machine learning to be to really do that and to recognize and spot the odd behavior, I think is absolutely important. And I think organizations are doing this. Another area which I find really interesting around all this is around how to support customers with vulnerabilities. And I found it particularly important right now with the COVID-19 and with the fact that a lot of people have entered into a vulnerable stage from a financial perspective, and not just a financial perspective. And again, the FCA in the UK has been very strong at really saying we really need to support vulnerable customers with a broader definition of vulnerability. And this is again where machine learning can come very helpful and really help spot signs of vulnerabilities, and therefore enable banks and financial institutions to support those clients. So everything and so anything that has to do with really being able to ingest and spot differences and odd behaviors, I think is really, really good. However, and I say this because I have a legal background, so I have to say however, but it's really, really important that we bear in mind that there are that these technologies come with costs, and the cost they come from it's really important that when organizations deploy them, they make sure that they deploy so in a way which is really not just privacy compliant, not just security aware, but also ethically aware, and ethics starts when the law ends. But it's really important, especially in the financial sector, that, for example, when an algorithm is deployed that looks at vulnerability, or when an algorithm is deployed that looks at potential fraudulent behavior, that doesn't have bias in the systems, that doesn't and of course bias can come on all different stages. So it's not just about historic data, which could potentially be fixed with the sampling, but even a perfect sample can be biased, and there are so many different issues in that. And also it's really about the privacy element of it. We need to make sure that whether we use a lot of data, customers' data, to train a machine, we need to make sure that our customers are really aware, and also aware that if a decision about them is made by a machine, we also need to make sure that they know how to ask for that decisions to be made by a human. We need to understand what is the degree of human in the loop and human intervention. So what I'm trying to say is that the opportunities are great. They're really fantastic. And I work with a lot of organizations that really do a lot of interesting things in forensics and investigations, and it's great. But all this comes with this greater power to do these things. There's also greater responsibilities. So the responsibility of financial institutions to really look at the potential intended and unintended consequences of the machines they bring in.
Thanks a lot, Ivana. Thank you in particular for mentioning sort of the ethical and privacy aspect. We will definitely come back to it, because it's not only about all the benefits and amazing things which AI can do for us, but we also need to bear in mind sort of what it brings with it. But I mean, one thing which I heard from all of you is basically, the change is coming, and in all of the aspects of financial industry. And so I'm quite curious to hear how the different participants in financial industry, being in banks or asset managers, fintechs, how they are ready to implement the AI, and are there differences between the different players? And so I would turn to Julia first and sort of ask you about the traditional players, being it banks or being it asset managers, credit funds, equity houses, hedge funds. What do you see there? What do you think that they are able to be nimble and agile to change and adopt AI quickly, or do you think they may be disrupted by some smaller newcomers?
Great question. Thank you. If I could please add something quickly to what Ivana was just saying. Ivana, I'm sure that you've read about the famous. There was basically a scandal when Goldman Sachs approved a husband. Do you want to talk about? I found that to be like one of those. There was a case where a husband and a wife applied for credit, and the husband was given 20 times the credit or something like that. It's the same. It's, you know, it's a married couple, and they basically blamed it on AI. Anyway, it's your area of expertise. It's not mine, but I just wanted to, you know, say I've read about cases.
I mean, you are correct, and it's an interesting one, because I mean that case really showed that the way the algorithm determines the credit lines that makes the risk of bias more acute anyway. So it's and also showed that that it's very difficult to understand how bias can creep in. So bias can come in because of the historic data. Yeah, bias can come in because you choose the sample, but the sample is not the right one. But bias can come in because of the features that you in the labels that you decide to use, and of course, you know that they are very subjective. So if even the definition of what is right and what is wrong is subjective. So obviously it's the bias and features, but also bias can come in from the evaluation state. It can come in from the aggregation. It can be that something that works for a specific territory or a specific with a specific data set that doesn't work in another environment, in a more generalized environment. So bias is a very complex topic, and my advice always to financial companies and to all organizations is no one way to tackle this. There are several ways. One is technical, and there are technical solutions. I mean, I use an algorithm myself that goes inside the algorithm that the financial institutions have deployed, and looked at if there is one particular element that has has played a bigger role in determining the output. So, and the outcome of that particular decision. So there are technical tools that can be deployed, and I use one called Guardian, and that's how I use it. But there is not just the technical element. Because an algorithmic fix is not going to be to fix the problem of bias. And I always say use the technical solution, but also test the solution with the people who are going to be impacted the most. And this is really important because of course, if you start using, as a lot of banks do, if you start using automated decisions, artificial intelligence to determine if people can receive or not a loan, if people can receive credit, if people can, whatever it is, then obviously some people are naturally going to be more exposed. And then there is a trade-off that needs to be made. And banks are in a very tricky position because obviously if a particular segment of population is historically less comes from, so it's more difficult to be treated from historic data, then obviously that needs to change, and that needs to be treated within the data set in a certain way. But at the same time, historic data is there to stay. It's the product of years and years of social hierarchies and inequalities, and so banks have in that difficult position where you can't ask a financial institution to act as a social equalizer, because that's not their role. Their role is to really make sure that they make a decision which is fair to them as well. But at the same time, what we do not want to harm individuals by locking them out when the outcome of a particular decision can happen because of an intentional bias. So it's a really difficult area, I have to say. It's not an easy one.
Yeah. So I think that what this is bringing to light, and I completely agree with you, is that tech is about 30%. Well, okay, tech is about 25% of the issue. The other 25% is data, because either we cannot get hold of good data, or it's difficult to get hold of, and we need more of the companies like Steven's company, like ThinkNum, that goes and scrubs the data. And then there's also culture. Right? There's also the fact that we're not really adept at dealing with issues of fairness, etc., where you can actually look at the data, right? So it's like you might have a sense of it, but here you have an actual, like, you're looking at the data, you're looking at the facts. It changes the conversation. It becomes a much more tangible conversation when I can prove it to you that your algorithm is just wrong. Do you know what I mean? Or you're looking at the output that is just wrong. And there is, at the strategy level, financial companies are conservative. They're conservative. It's very difficult for them to get anything new in the door. And a lot of it is management. A lot of it is the fact that, you know, companies are siloed and it's difficult for them to hire, you know, vendors that can do better. So CFA, if you go to the CFA website, has a study available for free. At least it was on the homepage a couple of months ago. I'm happy to send it to you if you want it. But CFA did a study of adoption of machine learning. And in terms of investment strategy and process that companies, you know, any asset management firm uses, only 10% of portfolio managers use AI ML techniques to improve their investment process. This is in the last 12 months. Only 10% use that. Okay, this is according to CFA. And it's not because these tools are not available. They are available, but the majority still rely on Excel. 95% of portfolio managers rely on Excel. Okay, and then obviously you do MATLAB with R, you know, and certain other things. Like I said, it's not for lack of tools. And then, you know, I can show you all sorts of data. I'm happy to send out that study. It's AI ML techniques versus unstructured data for industry and company analysis. 75% use nothing, okay, in terms of AI. For creating trading algorithms, 69% of companies use absolutely nothing out of the new tools. So the gap between leaders and laggards is enormous. It's really like, it's going like that if you look at the data.
Wow, that's interesting.
Talk about it. Happy to talk about it more. I just don't want to spend too much time on it.
No, but I mean, it's obvious that, yeah, the traditional players are really have, so they are set in their ways, and it's really difficult for them to embrace the change. And so maybe Stephen, following on that, do you see fintech, which obviously is the front runner in the AI application of AI technology? Do you see fintechs as sort of someone who will help the traditional players, so sort of like partner, or do you see them more like as disruptors who will try to eat their cake?
Great question. It depends it depends a little bit. So if you look at things like TransferWise, they are 100% focused on eating the banks in terms of FX. And there are, you know, other companies that are directly competing with banks and generally in fintech, you know, Monzo, Starlings of the world, the B2C applications. In terms of banks and other firms' approaches to how they work with some of the fintechs, some of them see them as a threat. Some of them don't see them at all and just kind of continue doing continue working the way they've always worked. Some have got active efforts in things like you know, encouraging innovation teams to actually go and try and hunt and find new fintech firms that they can partner with. But I think the thing that's scary is how big a difference there is between some firms. So when we go out and speak to firms in our part of the market, for some firms, within a month of having spoken to them, they're trialing our product, they're fully engaged with us, they've assigned people to look at it, and they've maybe signed up. With other firms, my favorite reply was from a very large asset manager, and the reply to us was, we're aware of you, but we're not culturally ready yet. And I think that summarizes quite a lot of what's going on in the space, is that a lot of people feel they're not culturally ready yet. But I think where that starts to change is where you realize that a competitor is using tech that you're not. So for example, we had a PE client of ours mention to one of the MDs in an investment bank that they'd used some of our data. The MD hadn't heard of us, but by the end of that day, they'd gone back to their team and found out what a 9fin was, because a client had mentioned it. So I think hopefully you reach a critical mass where firms engage and embrace with the tech, and they realize that actually this is largely here to help rather than to replace or compete with lots of these financial institutions.
Okay, that's really interesting. Would be interesting to hear which banks or institutions are more ready, but that's probably for separate discussion. Now turning to Ivana, like hearing that, you know, the change, some institutions goes very fast, some institutions go slow, but how about the regulator? is the regulator actually able to keep the pace with the changes and change the rules as needed in order to sort of keep the integrity of the financial services intact? I think you are on mute, Ivana.
It's a very good question, and it's not, and it's an interesting one for several reasons. So regulators and legislators. Let's start with the legislators. Legislators are behind, but that's obvious because the fast pace of the technological sort of speed is something else. And if you look, for example, at so the speed of politics to start grappling what is going on, it's obviously that more needs to be done in there in terms of from a legislator, in my view, to, for example, understand, do a fitness test of current legislations and see, okay, are we okay, or is there anything else that is not addressed by current legislation? So, for example, issues like, so if you say, if we agree that the potential harms of AI are exclusion, so the fact that you can be locked out of a particular thing or service or whatever it is, representation harm, the fact that, you know, by using historic data with bias inherent in the algorithms, you can perpetuate representational bias. And the third one is the third harm could be when you make complete confusion between correlation and causation. So things are correlated, and machine learning finds some patterns, but there's no cause there. It's just, and that could be very risky. So the thing is, from a current legislative perspective, AI doesn't stand in isolation. And this is really important because discrimination law, privacy law, liability, tort, consumer law, contract law, all of it, there is, you know, AI does not stand in isolation. A technological product, which is, I mean, a software, and it does have, if you use AI for automated decision in this sector, you do need to make sure that there is all this in the equation, because all this applies. Whether the harm, for example, if you look at dynamic dynamic pricing, that is an area where I don't think the legislation is caught up with all that. So that's the law. And so first thing I always say to organizations I work with is, don't think that all this doesn't apply. The second issue is in relation to the regulators. And I have to say that they've done some amazing effort at trying to understand how things, all these sets of laws intersect between each other, and how to support organizations with moving forward with this. So, for example, the Financial Conduct Authority, they've done really well, I think, in really saying, collaborating with the Information Commissioner, with highlighting the key challenges, with placing really saying to organizations, yes, new technologies can help, for example, when it comes to the use of AI in understanding and identifying vulnerable clients. The Information Commissioner, on the other end, has also been very helpful, and in terms of, for example, providing guidance on how they would interpret GDPR in AI. So the guidelines on explainable AI, the guidelines on how to create a sort of privacy security compliant AI system through auditing. And, you know, auditing an algorithm is a regulatory obligation. You know, you've got to audit your algorithm to make sure that it's not biased. You've got to do it as an organization. So there is a lot of guidance. There are also court cases that are going to be really useful. So, for example, the one that has just started around Uber, where Uber workers have basically said, we want to leverage on Article 15 on the GDPR, and we want to know how these algorithms work. That is really, really important, because should the court decide to take that on and to really say, yes, you know, you have a right to full transparency and to understand how your data is used in a system where, if you think of the Uber model, where you performance, pay, reward, and career progression is all decided by machines, by algorithms, then that could open up to a lot of other things, including in the financial sectors around transparency. So you have the law, you have the regulators, and you have court cases. And this brings me to what was said before, which is a lot of companies in the financial sector, they know, they are concerned about all this, because they say, how do we bring in a new automated system, and how do we bring in this fantastic potential of innovation through AI if we haven't got the clarity around the impact of legislation in the financial sector, contract law, privacy legislation, and how they intersect. This is why I always recommend a risk-based approach, and be able to say, okay, risk assess what you're trying to bring in, and create that sort of approach that allows you to sort of be confident in the way that you innovate. But there's a lot to take in when you create and deploy the systems.
Thank you very much, Ivana. That's interesting to see how everything interlinks with each other, and if as an institution you need to be mindful of all the areas in order to be compliant. Great. I'm a bit conscious of time, and I want to really give you guys time to ask questions. So I will just ask my last question to the whole panel, and which is probably relevant to all of us. And that's, what jobs do you think will be obsolete because of implementation of AI in the short to medium term? And on the other hand, what jobs will be created? And if you should give one advice or two to our audience, how can we stay competitive in this relatively fast-pacing, fast-change environment? So any of you, it's open to all of you.
I mean, the main point, you ask very difficult questions, but so in terms of an organization, if you want to be competitive and you want to, then you've got to put trust at the heart of what you're doing. The Center for Data Ethics, they've just issued their report. It's called the AI Barometer. And I really wish that every single player in the financial sectors, and I've sent it to all my clients, look at this, because it really shows that customers in the financial sectors, they are worried when it comes to the use of data. And they are they're concerned when they think that their personal data, especially special categories of data, they are used to make decisions about them. So trust is really, really crucial in transparency. So it's really saying, if you want to really innovate using these systems, you have to find innovative ways to deal with the customers, engage them, and be transparent with them. And that's the most important thing in my view. The second thing is just organizations need to be smart in saying, okay, what are the implications of what we're doing? What are what are the legal obligations, the regulatory obligations across different sectors that we need to really, how are we going to map the risks of what we're doing? And that includes privacy risks, ethical considerations, security and threat landscape, including, AI can pose massive risk from a security and threats as well, and say, how do we map all this? And how are we accountable with what we're doing? There's plenty of trade-offs that would be to be navigated. It's very difficult for a financial organization to navigate the trade-off between, for example, accuracy and data minimization. There are so many trade-offs that they need to be navigated. So I always say accountability is so important, because should you have an issue, then what you want is to be able to go to a regulator and say, I've done the right thing. Here's the process I followed. Here's and I think this is essential if organizations want to be in here for the long term.
Can I add?
Sure, go ahead, Julie.
Okay, so I completely agree with you. I think it's for individual companies, it's really a question: are they going to be around? Let's say by 2030, let's say we give them 10 years. I'll throw some stats on, at you. I'm a data person, so sorry. I think it just helps us to understand, you know what I mean? So 73% of millennials say they would rather handle their financial needs through Google, Amazon, or Apple, right? That's just an interesting fact, right? So they don't want to deal with the banks at all. Okay, but in terms of jobs, so one robot, right, in terms of RPA, replaces 4 to 5 full-time equivalents. I don't know if you know this. The cost is 15 grand a year, works 24/7. So if you take these kinds of numbers, so World Economic Forum published a report with Ernst & Young, and I'll just cite you some numbers from their projections. Again, these are projections, but World Economic Forum says this. In terms of investment management industry, by 2030, we're going to lose 24% of jobs. Okay, and they're not splitting it by, is it going to be more cuts on the portfolio manager side, back office side? You know what I mean? We don't know that, but basically a quarter of the employees in 10 years are going to be gone from investment management, we think, okay? Deposit and lending is going to lose 8% of the workforce. Where you're going to see the gains is in market infrastructure and professional services, 5% increase, and payments is going to have a 29, like a third, jobs are going to increase by a third. So these are the official stats. And again, I'm very happy to send it out to you guys if you want to see it. I think it's kind of interesting just to see whether you agree with this intuitively or not. But those are the numbers.
Yeah, I can jump in as well with a few thoughts. So all my former colleagues tell me you're automating my job. I don't think I'm going to be around in 10 years time. And I don't think that's quite right. I think if your role is something that's highly repetitive and standardized, that's very seriously at risk. So I'll take and I think the important thing as well is that these technology developments are not just limited to finance, they're across all industries. So for example, if you take the legal profession, if you're hiring a paralegal on 25 or 30,000 pounds a year and you're reviewing a ton of documentation in connection with a case, or say reviewing 10,000 lease agreements and you're extracting very standardized items like the lessor, the lessee, the addresses, things that are easily identifiable, you can get a machine to do that in a lot less time and a lot more cheaply. Those kind of roles are at risk. And then also in finance in particular, I mean, if you look at what happened in equities, the trading pits, largely gone. But there are other jobs that kind of appear, if you'd been a computer programmer and wanted to work in finance back then to develop an algorithm to trade things, maybe you wouldn't have had as much luck as you would have today. So there will be replacement jobs. I occasionally do get scared by some of the tech. So one of the things that I have to do or had to do in my old job was review debt documentation and look at kind of key legal provisions. And part of what you do to train an algorithm is tag up lots of data so that it can learn and start to identify things. And so when I would read a debt document, there are certain key words and phrases that I intuitively look at and think, oh, that then I understand what this clause means. So for example, in a debt document, you have an exception that says you're allowed to borrow a certain type of debt under a credit facility. And when I review a document, I look for the word credit facility and I go, oh, there's the credit facility basket. When we were training some of our algorithms on documents and tagging things up, our tech actually spotted a couple of credit facilities baskets that I had missed. And it was because they didn't use the word credit facility in the clause. And that's what I was looking for. Whereas the algorithm that we had trained was looking at the pattern of all the words together and the length of the clauses and their position within the document to work out what it was. So sometimes I get scared when things like that happen. But then again, that's a kind of analyzing contracts that are based on precedent that are highly standardized is a very automatable job. But the lawyers are always dreaming up new ways to kind of add innovation and new things. And if you don't have historic training data, it's a lot harder to automate roles and analysis. So a lot of the higher level relationship management and advising companies, I think a good portion of that's quite hard to build a machine to replace human interaction.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. really, really interesting. I think there's a lot coming our way. But I would like to open the floor to you all guys to ask questions. There were so many different topics we touched on, so anything you would like to ask, please go ahead.
Eva, I think you were amazing in the sense, like I had quite a few questions prepared and you addressed all of them and the panel was really good at that. So I was thinking about talking about trustworthy AI and the bias decisions. Ivana already talked about that, about the regulation, about where we are going to be in 10 years from now. But something I still want to ask about. So we talked, regulators are looking at artificial intelligence and the impact, but are also the regulators looking at making all the laws and all their, for example, all the regulation that's coming, machine readable to be easily understood by different machines. So for example, I work in compliance and regulation, and I don't know how long it's gonna take for machines to take my job to be able to basically like read everything that the regulators are coming up with and make sense of it and translate that in business language.
It's an interesting one, yeah.
Do you think it's going to take, I know like the regulators, for example, now they are embracing also the cloud at their own level and the premises. So I'll be interested to know also like how long it's going to take for them to look at artificial intelligence and machine learning.
You mean for who to look at artificial intelligence? What was the last thing you said?
For example, for the text to be able for machine learning, for example, to plug in your own system and to be able to read all the text from the regulators and to make sense of that and translate it into the business language.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, can I just say a few things what you said? I mean, you mentioned you mentioned the trustworthy AI. I just wanted to add one thing about it. It's that there is a lot of debate around what trustworthy AI is. You know, people call it responsible AI. There's about 180 documents around the world that have some things in common. You know, transparency is in common. But there is one thing that I just wanted to say in relation to this. It's really important that organizations, especially in the financial sector, they translate all this into practice. So, for example, people say transparency, and transparency is different from explainability, which is related to the algorithm. So if we say we have to be transparent with our customers, that doesn't mean that we have to provide them with a code and say this is what we've done, but it's really about what does it mean, and also what does fairness mean in lending, for example. How are we going to achieve it? Fairness in mathematical terms is very complex to achieve, and there are so many different ways that they're all incompatible between each other. But what is the outcome that the bank wants? You know, what is, so really codify exactly what these terms mean, and this is really important. In terms of replacement of jobs, can I be very honest here? I really don't know. And I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen. So I think in sort of at the beginning, everybody was saying, well, it's a man jobs are going to replace. It's not true, maybe. But I also think that a lot of this will depend on the development of AI. AI, at the moment, the problem with AI is that it's not context aware. So, of course, if it's not context aware, of course, you do need human skills, and we should be talking about augmentation rather than replacement. We should be talking about how do machines and humans work alongside each other. And to me, that is the most important thing. And it's not a silly consideration. It's not, because that means how do organizations work with their employees and put them at the heart and center of what they're doing, because they are the ones that need to collaborate with the machines. And what does that mean in practice? You know, you want your employees to be on board with what you're doing. don't want them to, they're going to lose their job, you know. So it's and organizations that do not take this seriously, they're not in it for the long term, because they need to say, okay, this is how we are envisaging the future to look like. And so it's really the problem is I don't think we really know a lot with the development, is research going to be a lot of this. I mean, if you think about the situation with COVID-19, a lot of things along the investment and research will be going into automation, but where would they go? I don't think it's easy. I mean, I don't know if any of you has got sort of ideas around what exactly but was going to happen, but I think it's very much unknown at this stage.
Thank you, Ivana. We have actually one more question for you, which was posted, and that's, any comments about the explainability principle from the FCA and the framework for explainability that will be coming from them? Yeah,
it's interesting. So, so the FCA, they're working really hard because do you know what the problem is? The problem is that I don't know how many of you have read the guidance on explainability of the Information Commissioner alongside the guidance on auditing algorithms that the Information Commissioner has put out. They're not easy. They're not easy because they've done an excellent work, but they're not easy because a lot of when an organization deploys a system is how do you translate all that into practice, and what does really explainability means. You know, explainability says, for example, you need to be able to explain how you reached a particular decision, but what does that really mean? You know, if you jump on a plane, if you go on a plane, you don't know how the engine works unless you know, because you're not an engineer. So you don't go in the plane, you open up and you look at the engine and see how it works, because you wouldn't be able to understand it. But what you do know is that when the plane has been built and the engine has been put into the plane, due process has been followed. That there has so to me, explainability is important when it's basically able to say, yes, we follow these standards, we follow this due diligence, and I think the FCA is doing will go into that direction and say this is the due diligence that we expect to be followed. This is the and because otherwise, if explainability means that you're going to open up a black box and say to a customer, this is how we reached this decision, that will need this explainability the most, because only a few people will be able to understand it. So navigating what explainability means is not an easy thing. So I would suggest really to take into account, to look at what the Information Commissioner has done, to look at the FCA and keep really serious considerations the work that they're doing on explainability and the guidance. Now, none of it is binding, but the law is binding on explainability. The GDPR is there. So I would say really trying to understand and to assess what that means for you as an organization. What do you want your customer to be able to understand and why? How do you want your customers to be informed about the decisions that you're going to make? And this is really important, as well as when the FCA comes out, do respond to it with what you think is missing.
Can I add to that in terms of trading? So in trading, you have all of this complexity and additional complexity in the sense that you have supervised and unsupervised learning, right? So if you have unsupervised, it's not only, first of all, you don't have a process, and honestly, you don't know what the machine is gonna end up deciding. You don't know, and you're not even supervising it, right? So all you know is it learns and it makes a decision. And so UBS, for example, has, like, if you go to UBS website, they essentially realize that they need to do something about it, and they created, their AI ML team basically says, as your algorithm is deciding in an unsupervised fashion, it's going to output to you how it's arriving at the decision while it's doing that. So you see what I'm saying, right? So it's almost like there's a log right? Like when your stored procedure, like there's a log that's running and it's telling you what's happening step by step by step. And then obviously you can take that to the regulators, or you can, later on do a postmortem on it, etc. But that's a big deal for financial services companies now with unsupervised learning.
Thanks, Julia. I'm conscious a little bit over time. We are running over a few minutes, but I would like to give you guys a chance for last question, if there is any. No, everybody can't wait for dinner, I think. Relatively late. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Anyone? No. Okay, brilliant. Again, we are already 7:30, so everybody already wants to get on with dinner. So I would like to thank you, Julia, Ivana, Steven. Thank you very much for joining us. It was a real pleasure to have you. I would also like to thank Molly, who is my partner in crime in organizing this Sharing the Knowledge episode. So thanks so much. And then I can't forget, obviously, Mark and Katie. Without them, it wouldn't be possible to be here today. And last but not least, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any follow-up questions or any feedback, please contact us, and we are all ears. And with that, I wish you a very nice evening, and we look forward to our next Sharing the Knowledge episode, which we plan to do after the summer break. I think E2W, as we have one more session, I think next week, Mark, which please attend. It will be another interesting topic to discuss.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well done, Eva. Thank you very much, and Molly, and our guests. Thank you.
Thank you
very much.